Alle mie spalle
Behind me, you can see the northern coastline of the Sea of Galilee, where the event of the multiplication took place. After the event of the multiplication of the loaves and fishes, Jesus dismissed the crowds, and the Gospel tells us that literally he made the disciples get into the boat and precede him to the other side. But what did Jesus do? He climbed up the mountain to pray, not only to remain alone in order to be alone, but rather he was alone in order to have an encounter with the Father. It's really beautiful, this balance that Jesus had between active and contemplative life during the night on the mountain. What happened during that night as morning approached? The apostles were out on the boat with everyone helping to row. They were both occupied and preoccupied with rowing because the wind was against them, and practically they were unable to go forward. The waves were obstacles and stopped them from making progress. Suddenly they saw someone walking on the water. And we can read this directly from Matthew's Gospel, chapter 14, verses 26 to 32. When the disciples saw him walking on the sea, they were terrified. "It is a ghost," they said, and they cried out in fear. At once Jesus spoke to them, "Take courage, it is I, do not be afraid." Peter said to him in reply, "Lord, if it is you, command me to come to you on the water." He said, "Come." Peter got out of the boat and began to walk on the water toward Jesus. But when he saw how strong the wind was, he became frightened, and beginning to sink, he cried out, "Lord, save me." Immediately, Jesus stretched out his hand and caught him, and said to him, "O you of little faith, why did you doubt?" After they got into the boat, the wind died down. So what was happening here? They were all occupied and preoccupied, that they were not able to go forward, and then they saw someone walking on the water. It is written that literally they became shocked and upset by this event. The verb in Greek is tarasso, which is typically of the agitation of the water, meaning that the atmospheric events, in this case the wind and the waves, influenced their mood. They were agitated. Their interior being was agitated. They were overtaken by fear and panic. Then they saw this person walking on the water as a ghost. Why? Because it seemed to be him, but it could not have been him. This was their thinking. And they cried out with fear. The Gospel tells us that immediately Jesus said, "Take courage, it is I. Do not be afraid." Matthew tells us more than the other Gospel writers, because Peter entered into the scene and said, "Lord, if it is you, command me to come to you on the water." And Jesus said, "Come." Peter overcame his doubt, and so the former "if" was no longer present. It was cancelled because Jesus commanded him, and so he got out of the boat, walked on the water until something happened. What happened? Peter began to look around him. He looked at the wind. He looked at the strong wind. Apart from the fact that he had seen it before, he began to look at it again, and so he became afraid and began to drown. This is a teaching for us also. Jesus said to him, "Why did you doubt?" This verb can only be found in Matthew, distarso, meaning to be on two sides, in two places. What was Peter's problem? Peter's problem, fundamentally, was that he looked elsewhere. As long as he looked to Jesus, he was sure that it was Jesus who had commanded him, and he was winning. He walked on the waters. But the moment he looked elsewhere, he was distracted. He looked to the wind, that is, if he could really see the wind, if not the effects of the wind, like the waves in the water, and he became afraid, looking to two sides. It is not possible to look to two objectives at the same time. We must direct our eyes only to him, the Master who is before us. Peter, who in any case we should thank, because he managed to walk for a part, at least on the water. We needed to highlight this fact. But he did not continue to look towards Jesus. Distarso, two places. And Jesus said, "Why did you look to two sides? Why did you have one foot on one side and one foot on the other, rather than being completely directed towards Jesus? Only in this way can we walk on the sea." The sea in our life is the difficulties and the situations in which humanly we are unable to survive or to stay afloat. But trusting in him and looking to him, we find that day after day things are resolved, and all of the agitation of the water does not disturb or upset our heart. This in itself is a miracle, a sign of the Lord's intervention, that we are not afraid of the external circumstances, but rather we have peace that comes from the Lord, looking to Him. He is imperturbable. He walks in the waters, and we must keep our eyes fixed on Him. This icon of the living Jesus who commands us, "Come, do not be afraid." This is the same for us also, as the Word of God tells us. Look to Him and be radiant, and your faces may not blush for shame. I invite you to look to Him, but not just for a moment, rather to keep our eyes always directed at the Lord, until the end. Only in this way we will not be afraid, and only in this way we will continue to remain floating in our lives and overcome the difficulties that will always be present. Because the gospel doesn't cancel any of them, but does give us the way to overcome them in Jesus and with Jesus. Until the next time from the Sea of Galilee,